people do to art, they do to other people. What happens to this image of difference happens to people of difference. And sooner or later, it's going to happen to people that are just a little tiny bit different.
From the very beginning, it was a polarized debate. It was, I'm for the deer, I'm against the deer. Thought it was a little bit out of place, but I really didn't feel as though it was something I was gonna start complaining about.
Art isn't supposed to make you comfortable. I think it's supposed to make you a little uncomfortable.
Language is so direct and so precise that I think people lose sight of the nuance of visual language.
Whether we ended up settling the whole thing or not seems moot to me now because the thugs rule.
You have to recognize that there are reactions to things. There are consequences of things that you say, because saying something is doing something.
In the very short time that the sculpture was there in public, it's had a really remarkable and dynamic career on this campus. It's really been extraordinary.
Thank you, Mark Swanson. Thank you, Butler family. I'm sorry that it came at a sacrifice, but incredible things happened on this campus.
Again, I'm at a loss of words. This whole week has been draining, and it's been entirely distressing, and it's sort of losing steam.
This will get out. This will become a smirk on the national headlines. That this happened here. That in Indiana they couldn't handle anything even visually different.
October 12th, the sculpture was installed, and October 31st, it was removed.
I had no idea the deer was coming. I didn't see the preparations for it at all. I didn't see it unpacked. I was walking up the stair in Asbury, and a philosophy professor said, "Have you seen that deer yet?" And I thought they were referring to actually a live animal, because I had seen a deer on Seminary Street about a month before. So I said, "Yeah," and they said, "No, it's out there now." And we got through the confusion, and they said, "There's this deer out there." I said, "You're the only one who'll ever like it." And actually, the good thing about that comment was I really did like it right away. I thought of it as it was the first sort of advance in architecture at this school that didn't seem predictable to me.
I saw them working on it, they were setting it up, that kind of thing. And I remember kind of being confused, but not really thinking too hard about it, just being like, well, that's strange. I remember getting on the phone and calling one of my friends, just being like, ha, that's kind of funny. Like, look, you know, DePauw put up this deer.
Unfortunately, I did not have any firsthand information prior to placing the deer or anything like that. I wished I had.
I think the administration kind of took the stance that they don't need approval of the students. Most of the students didn't even know that the deer was being placed where it was until we saw the construction vehicles out there digging the hole and putting it in. And still then everybody was like, are they putting up Christmas decorations early this year?
Despite my being an art major, the first time I saw the sculpture, I thought it was ugly, I thought it was tacky, I didn't like it, and I thought it was a joke. I was walking to class, I think it was, I don't remember what morning, and I was like, what the heck is that thing? And then I remember being in class and hearing people talk about how much they hated it, and I mean, I kind of felt sorry for it. I was like, gosh, it's not that bad. I mean, yeah, it's kind of tacky, but I mean, geez, calm down. And, you know, a few people were like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna ride it, I'm gonna, you know, or that thing's gonna get peed on, or it's gonna be destroyed the first weekend. I mean, I heard that all day long.
I study art that isn't in museums, that doesn't show up in the sanctified frame of the museum. And so it was good. I was very, very interested right away as to how people will interact with the deer. Of course, now we know people have interacted with the deer in extreme and intense ways.
Fits and Starts, a sculpture by New York-based artist Mark Swanson and a gift of the Butler Family Foundation to DePauw University, was removed Monday because of significant acts of vandalism.
We have a great show tonight lined up, very full of issues current to DePauw's campus right now. First, we have Katie Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And we're going to discuss Fits and Starts, the deer sculpture by Mark Swanson, and everything that's going on around campus right now with regards to that. And as everyone should know at this point, it was vandalized over the weekend in almost nonstop discussion is occurring in and outside of classes in almost every aspect of campus right now.
When I took a look at the deer, I noticed two different kinds of damage. The first kind of damage was the kind of damage that you might expect from a single event, where someone deliberately and maliciously sawed off one of the antlers of the deer. I think it was on the left-hand side of the deer. And there was a clear pattern of striations cutting across the rebar armature of the deer, and a little nub left over, which is what you would have when the thing breaks off. And there were some fresh burrs that were left on the surface that could still have a cutting force that be left over from the sawing process. And it was a clean and bright cut.
Initially what we began to hear was just rumors about people riding the deer, taking pictures with the deer, whatever. And again, you know, our staff was aware of that. And again, you know, while we increased checks and such, there was initially not a lot of visible damage or any at all with just riding the deer and such. But as we have learned that all of that riding the deer created stress fractures in the legs that now, you know, amount to the sum of some of the damages to the deer.
Everything else looks like a pattern of continuous stress applied to the deer, I think, because of a riding process. People climbing on the deer, grabbing onto the antlers because it's at a steep angle. If they don't grab onto the antlers, they'll slide off, and rocking back on it and trying to ride it.
Mark Swanson, who's the artist, I think that a lot of people were worried that this was going to really offend him. He was going to be really upset. The fact that he didn't come, I don't even know what that means.
One of the tips of the antlers was broken just a little bit. I called him up and he thought it was, he laughed a little bit. He said, well, I can fix that. And then he thought it was very interesting that, and people have gotten a lot of facts wrong about this. This deer was in a place in Brooklyn for over a year. Not 2 years, not 6 months, whatever people are saying, in a rough neighborhood, like 3 blocks away from the projects, and it was never touched. And he just found it very interesting that it was on a campus, college campus, for 2 weeks, and already something had been done. But at that point, he kind of laughed it off because we knew we could fix it. But then once the other damage was done, and I sent him all the, all the stuff from the DePauw, all the student comments, faculty comments, whatever, and that's when he made the decision not to come, because he thought that those things were hostile. There's like kind of a hostile feeling in there, and really it had nothing to do with him.
The last Thursday and Friday we were musing, we were wondering, we were in a new discursive space with all this, and then the vandalism happened over the weekend, and the internet just exploded with it. A professor sent out a blog statement onto Facebook, called the students out, called them to action, used incredibly powerful language to do so. Students started gathering there, and things just started happening very quickly. People lost sleep. People were up till 3, 4 in the morning.
Within 24 hours, the first vandalization occurred, then the second one just set me off. The funny thing was I didn't want to wait for the newspaper because of that delay. It was 2 weeks the first time, and I thought, well, if I send a letter now, it might not even get in the paper by Tuesday. And I went home and I said, what's the fastest way I can get to these kids besides calling them up and saying they're a bunch of jerks? And I thought of the Facebook, because I've been looking at it over the deer really for 2 weeks.
Facebook is a internet database of college and high school students where they put up profiles and pictures of themselves and likes and dislikes, political affiliations, and so forth. And that realm had been largely closed to professors, but once word started running about the deer being on Facebook, we all immediately signed on and were able to see all these different groups. I love the deer, for the love of all things holy, please remove the deer. And then the more really sinister ones, of course, I rode the deer, I raped the deer.
I went on and I thought, well, how can I get everybody to read it? So I bought an advertisement. It cost me $30. And I bought it for 3 days and $10 a day. And every person who went on got to see the little the link to the blog. And the blog, I stand by it. I still think all of us should be responsible for it.
There was a rally at noon on Monday, and I think that's the first kind of group event, and the emotions were unbelievable at that rally.
What has happened is ethically and morally repugnant. And we need forceful words to say that in whatever language is appropriate to those we're talking with.
I'm used to standing in front of works of art and talking about them, but I haven't ever had to look back and apologize for being a member of a community that can't handle any kind of difference.
This might sound like a personal attack, and that's because it is. I make no bones about it. I am, with every ounce of my being, attacking the people who decided that for whatever reason, they were entitled to destroy this work of art.
One of the messages that this act of vandalism sends to us, sends to you, sends to the world, is that we who hate this thing and destroy it act and speak on behalf of the majority.
I was a vandal as a boy. I egged cars and I broke windows and I egged pianos.
And I couldn't stand back there and listen to everyone and not say something because we are all responsible for this, and a lot of us don't want to be because I don't want to be.
People laugh who hear this now, but also I was a virgin. I was a virgin for 25 years of my life, and I was very insecure with my masculinity. And so I felt I had to do this stuff to get other guys' attention and also the girls' attention too.
I think if you interviewed every person at this campus and you said, do you support vandalism? They would say, I don't support vandalism, including the vandals.
I'm not the biggest fan of the architecture of Julian. I should probably just take a sledgehammer to it. You know, there's a lot of books in our library I just don't like. Why don't we just burn them?
So I'm asking you please to come forward in an active method. You don't have to talk, you can write letters. If you hate it, please circulate a petition, have it removed. It would show far more respect for the piece of art and for the idea of art in general.
Nobody supports racism, nobody supports homophobia, nobody supports any of that stuff, and yet it still goes on.
In the 1930s, the Nazi regime destroyed much art. They called it degenerate. Recently, in the invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban was responsible for destroying several large Vijayamman Buddha statues. What really separates our student body from that?
And, you know, like the comparisons were made, and there were things said like about, you know, like Nazis and the Taliban destroy art too. And a lot of that was just a sort of immediate, we're really, really pissed about this kind of reaction. And so it was a little exaggerated, which is fine because it was an emotional response, you know, and it was an emotional thing that happened. I don't think that what we were doing necessarily, because I was like one of the people that put those signs up, I don't think that what we were doing is saying these people are Nazis. I think what we were saying, or what the way I saw it, is saying, look at the other bad stuff that happens. Look at the other things that happen when people destroy art, and look at the sort of significance that it's had in historical settings.
I wasn't so much concerned about the issue pertaining to the deer as much as the dialogue that was occurring afterwards. DePauw students were being compared to Nazis, and Chiarella was claiming that students voicing an opinion in opposition to having the deer in the middle of campus was what resulted in the vandalism, which I don't believe he was accurate in those statements.
Welcome back to The Source. I'm here with Professor Chiarella and Ann Harris for the interview you've all been waiting for. Joining me will be the most controversial professors, I'd say, in the past couple of months. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you both have taken very public stances on the vandalism of the deer. And Professor Chiarella, you have actually written a blog on Facebook almost attacking the students on this matter. But according to that, all the viewers that are watching right now that are students and me would be considered a jerk. What's your statement on that?
Well, I was working to provoke people because I felt that people needed to take a stand.
Okay.
I call my children jerks all the time, and they don't react quite as strongly as people here do. Of course, people don't know me, and my children do, so I understand the context of that.
Right.
My sense was that I was complicit in it as well, and I kind of feel that people ought to turn to me and say, you're responsible for the culture that's here as well, and they have. So in the last week, I've had some really interesting debates about it. I stand by it. I feel that if the community had gone quiet, if the lights had gone dark, if people had let this thing pass without reacting, we are a bunch of jerks. And I said we this time, but I know I said you on Sunday, and I was asking you to really consider yourself and to consider the community we build and the community we live in. So I don't really take it back. People have asked me to. On the other hand, the community itself has proven to me, at least, and I think to everybody who's visiting campus, that they're ready for an active discussion of the issue.
The most inflamed speech about the deer, the speech that did the least amount of good came from professors. And professors started voicing opinions about the student body that hinted of repression. They seemed to go back years, like things that they would say about the students that were bigoted and that were closed-minded, and that, you know, it's not surprising coming from Midwestern students. It's not surprising coming from white suburbanite conservatives.
There's a saying in democracy, innocent until proven guilty. Now, all these accusations are going around without any proof whatsoever. And students, as a student body, feels there's a big, huge generalization being made on them, and unfairly. What's your take on that?
There's a generalization that students might not be responsible for the deer itself. I mean,
Right.
It's a generalization that I'm presuming that it's students who did this.
I think it's really bad too, but what I think is even worse is the fact that we are so ready to point fingers at people. People are standing up here and they're pointing at my house, and they're saying that they're implying that we did this. And I have a problem with that. I live here. This is my campus too. So I have a huge problem with people getting up here and pointing at my house and saying that this is our fault. We didn't do this.
You know, my sense is I know what happens at 1:30 in the morning in front of Phi-Sci, in front of Harrison Hall, in front of Asbury, who's there, who populates the place. So I guess I am presuming it. But I guess I haven't heard anybody suggest that there's any evidence to the contrary.
I remember getting most angry, honestly, at a meal. I think it was lunch, the day the first paper came out on Friday, the day after they had taken it down. Some of the opinions that were being brought up to me were almost unacceptable. Things like, well, I hate it and I don't really like it, so it's okay that it got destroyed. Or, well, I don't really agree that people, took things to it, but whatever, it's okay. And the worst to me was they should have expected that to happen when they put it up on a college campus. I think that's absurd.
I've heard the argument, or at least the statement, that we should have expected this. No. Why? When you buy a car, do you expect that it will have windows broken, paint scratched, the radio stolen? No.
When I start to hear people say, we can't know, we can't say, we can't worry about it, it's a thin line from saying that to, we knew it was going to happen, we have to expect it. What do you expect? Kids will be kids, boys will be boys.
When people say, what do you think is going to happen? It's really a level there's a tacit approval of this action when you kind of use that as the excuse. Nobody's in favor of vandalism, but to say, what do you expect, implies that this is within the bounds of normal behavior, even if it's not legal behavior.
Like right when it was put up, we set up the expectation that it was going to get, taken down, that it was going to get destroyed, that it didn't have a chance of staying here. I mean, when people said, oh, I give it a week, I was kind of like, yeah, and so I think that what that did was that, it really does create this sort of condition that allows for somebody to do that, I think that through a lot of the things that were said, that created the possibility and created the expectation that someone was going to do it. And so I think that to a certain extent, the people that did it, and this isn't to in any way exonerate them or justify their actions, but it was almost like they were like, well, somebody's got to do it, so I might as well.
I hated this deer. I did. I thought it was ugly. I thought it was hideous, and it blinded me when I walked by it. It was gaudy. It was tacky. But now I feel something for this deer. And I'm crying for this deer.
It is one thing to dislike the deer. It is one thing to hate the deer. But that does not mean that those feelings necessarily lead to this action.
And at the point where we say, because you don't like the deer, you can't say anything about it, or you can't start a group, I would contend that you do have the right to start a group, because that is your right as an American citizen to voice your dissent.
To say, oh, well, it didn't really happen because of what we did. It didn't really happen because of what we said, so therefore we're not accountable. That's bullshit. Everybody here is accountable.
So I would like to say that it is bullshit to quiet dissent.
That yes, there is freedom of speech, and I fully defend that, and I think that's an amazing thing, right? But that freedom of speech doesn't exist in a vacuum. That you can't, sure, you can say whatever you want, but you have to recognize that there's going to be consequences, that things happen because of what people say. Words have power.
Destruction of works of art always, always precedes the burning of books, the burning of buildings, the lynching of people, gay bashing.
Now it shames me to be a part of this campus, to be a part of this student body that feels that they can take this into their own hands if they do not like it, and that disgusts me. You have to do something. This is pathetic. It's pathetic, and I don't want to leave here in May and know that my 4 years have stood for this.
I was just thinking, well, I'm an art major, like why not react to the destruction of art with more art? And so I started considering what it was that was so wrong with the sculpture and why it was destroyed and why people hated it so much. And most people I talked to were like, it's tacky, it doesn't fit in. I don't know why they should have made it bronze, or they should have made it stone, or I don't know why they put it there, or they should have put it over at Peeler, like art's supposed to behave itself or something, and it's only supposed to be for art people to see it. And
actually, when we were looking at the sculpture, we thought students would really love it. We thought it was fun because it was such a contrast to the kind of sedate, neo-Georgian, conservative look of campus. I mean, we genuinely thought that students would really welcome it, something different. And fun and kind of young. I mean, it wasn't like a real staunchy piece of sculpture.
So I created, with my accomplice, Haley Patterson, a stone polo sculpture, which isn't really stone. There's this really cool spray paint at Walmart that you can spray and it looks like stone, and that's actually what we use. But we popped the color, and we put it out there where the deer had been, and it was pretty interesting to see the reactions to it.
We were really interested in the fact that people thought that this sparkly deer, this sparkly gay deer, didn't fit in our colonial architecture. I mean, what is colonial architecture? I don't know. And I guess we wanted to make that sort of, not to tease people. I think a lot of people took offense to it, like, well, I pop my collar, are they making fun of me? No, we really don't care about you. Honestly, we're talking about the entire student body. We're questioning. We wanted to pose the question about what does fit in.
I'd heard that some people were really upset about it, some people were really pissed, some people thought it was really funny, which I liked because I think it's funny. And some people were like, oh yeah, I see what they're doing, like that fits in, I get it.
Our sculpture was taken or stolen, or yeah, stolen, I guess you could say, after it was up for about 24 hours.
It must not stop here. The next person you see should be confronted by your passion, and the next person. Connected here are 100 or more people. If each of us speaks to 2 or 3 more people today, and each of them speaks to 2 or 3 more, we will have reached everyone on campus.
Everyone on campus in some ways has their own kind of personal narrative about what's happened. And now it's been almost a week later, and people are starting to reflect instead of act. And so we're entering maybe, I don't think the last chapter of this, but definitely another phase, another mode of interacting with the deer.
I wish that people, when they looked at it and said, I hate it, would have taken the opportunity to ask themselves, why do I hate it?
If I didn't have a response to what had happened on campus, I don't think I could have lived with myself for the rest of my life as a creative individual.
The deer has become so much more now.
It's not just a piece of modern art. It's not just an ugly, gaudy lawn ornament. It represents the mood. It represents the tolerance on this campus. It's completely indicative of the entire environment that is this campus now.
And like, as much as I look at what happened, and I want to get up and I want to get angry about it, and I want to change things on this campus and change mindsets. I think something a lot more subtle that it's brought out is the sort of differing ways in which people think about art, and the differing ways that art and politics and art and political meaning kind of intersect. And I think it seems like in the art world, and as it gets reflected by faculty and art students on this campus, really clings to an idea of definite meaning, or of artistic kind of like an almost fixed interpretation. I mean, you go onto the DePauw website when the article about fits and starts was up, and they would say, this sculpture is a reflection of the artist's background as a gay male from a conservative hunting family, or that this sculpture is about motion and motionlessness, or the sculpture is about leaping bounds. I think all those are really great interpretations, and they're fruitful and productive. But on this campus, it seems like you get these people all of a sudden that say, well, I didn't like the sculpture, but then I figured out what the sculpture was about. I think thinking that way is really kind of reductive. And then from there, people start saying, hey, this is a gay deer, or smashing this deer is an act of homophobia, when really it's an act of idiocy, or an act of thoughtlessness. And that might have the same roots as an act of homophobia, but to equate an art object with a really fixed interpretation or a really fixed political connotation just seems kind of simplistic.
I don't think that people were like, oh, it's a symbol of gayness, let's destroy it, or that's why I hate it. What I do think, though, and I was sort of reluctant to admit this at first, is that people's such vehement reactions to things that are different.
Because if I had to characterize the vandalization of fits and starts, I would characterize it less as a hate crime and more of a general ambivalence towards art and the art culture at our university. I think, everyone knows that hate crimes stem from ignorance, but I think this is the inverse. I think that a seemingly hateful act was committed because DePauw students generally do not understand or hold in high regard art in their own lives.
And I've seen the worst of DePauw and the best of DePauw. I've never seen such thoughtful students, never heard such thoughtful comments. I've never seen such ignorance all at the same time. But the best of it, I have to think, will prevail, because they really are giving it thought and they're giving it their passion.
I've never seen money spent so efficiently to create dialogue and discussion. Everything from students talking in my class who never talk in class, to students writing and faculty writing letters to the editor who never write letters to the editor, to students getting out on campus with bullhorns and talking about the issues that concern us centrally in the liberal arts. I can't imagine a more efficient way to spend money than to get that kind of dialogue going with really, relatively speaking, such a small price tag.
They've given $60,000 essentially to school, and they've gotten out of that probably 200 classroom discussions, and I think really angry ones, and people not responding just to what I said, but to the sort of notion of this thing being in our midst. And it gave people who understood that, or at least understood the importance of its presence in our midst, a chance to speak, and as well as those who objected to it, and it got them on a kind of platform that I believe is the safest, which is the college classroom. And if there were 200 classes, and I think that's absolutely an underestimation of how many there probably were individually that did that, then, I don't know, put it up to the dollar. It's not very much a minute, so it's pretty cheap. And I guess I've seen a lot more money spent on a lot grander things that had a lot less effect.
Why is it necessary to have such a big conversation about a deer when there's a war going on? There are dozens of hurricanes all over the country and in the world. What is the purpose of talking about a deer? And you two flamed a fire that was about to quench, but with your blog, and your statements, students were just fired up. And I've heard
Well,
that
I
you
wish
got
I could get them fired up about the war. And you know, it was the first time in my life I thought, you know, maybe that is the job of a professor, is to be provocative, to be a person who is setting a charge into people. I don't want to do it every time, but I sure liked it when I was in college.
I think it's really good that we've been able to create this dialogue about a deer and a piece of artwork, which may not ultimately change our life, but I think it'd be even better if we could create a similar kind of dialogue about some of the more important things like alcohol abuse, homophobia, sexual assault, and rape, because we don't talk about that. So.
The message, I guess the thing people want is don't call us jerks, don't say things, don't provoke us, you know, just teach us. And, you know, I get 25 kids at a time, you know, in a classroom. And this time, I frankly think this institution had failed in some way, and I think probably every classroom in some sense is a measure of that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go beyond the classroom. And I guess I don't think it was a very good teaching moment because, in a sense, the absence of the deer is the biggest demonstration of all of the institutional apathy towards art.
Right? And the shame of it is that now it is going to be put inside the glass box of Peeler. I think that might be something that happens to it. It won't be put back outside. It won't be in the public sphere anymore. And it will only be seen by the people who come to Peeler. And that's a terrible shame.
But that could change. I mean, I think over time, if enough voices rise up and, you know, and if there's enough tolerance built that we can accept things that provoke us in our midst, then maybe things like the blog will just look like what they are, which is little tiny petty tests. The kind of thing that in your life you're going to have 1,000 times, 1,000 times, and somebody's always going to be asking you to, calling you a name or putting you in a corner, and then your actions will ultimately define you.
My favorite student comment was a young woman who had been crying the entire time and stood up and with great difficulty said,
I think this sculpture became something more over the weekend. A better sculpture. Something that doesn't make you stop and look anymore. It makes you stop and feel passion.
As I'm starting to learn in other aspects of my life, sometimes very bad things can be spun positively because they force people to have an opinion and become passionate about something. It's very easy to be complacent when things are status quo.
I think that art is a reflection of society, and I think that our treatment of art is also a reflection of society and of our general mores. I think that art has the capacity, is one of the few things that really has the capacity to to invoke like these great passions in people.
The most positive thing, I think, is the possibility, is the minority student response that, hey, art is important and this has uncovered a problem. And now that people are awake, and now that this is, before it goes stale, before it becomes a cartoon, there are things that we can do in the short term and in the long term to advance art appreciation and to basically rouse the student body, starting in the Midwest, starting with this region, and make art important again to a young person.
This sounds strange to say in retrospect, right? This sounds absurd to say in retrospect, but it may not have occurred to us that it wouldn't be obvious that it was a work of art. Maybe in retrospect, it should have been obvious to us that it wasn't clearly a work of art and ought to have been labeled as such and ought to have carried a sign that said, do not ride the work of art.
I think it's a shame that it was removed. And I did want it to stay there, and I think Tom Carella had an interesting point about that. He said, we should just leave it there until it's this, one piece of dangling rhinestone on a piece of rust or something, and families will come in here and say, well, what was that? Why is that here? And he'd say, well, yeah, that was our response to art. And we destroyed something, so we're just gonna keep it there. See how they feel after that.
I'd just like to say thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for showing support. Thanks for thinking. Thanks for encouraging others to think. And I encourage you, I forget who said it earlier, but if everybody out here goes and talks to 2 people, talks to 3 people, then eventually we'll have had a discussion with everybody.